Judica County. My name is Josh Whitaker. Glad you're here with us today. Today on our podcast, we're going to be doing two things. I've got a panel of attorneys here. In a minute, I'll introduce everybody. But today, we're going to spend some time talking about DUI law in North Carolina. We're going to talk about what to do if you're stopped. A law enforcement officer suspects you might be intoxicated in your driving. We're going to talk about what you could be charged with, license suspension, revocation, things that you're going to have to deal with if you are, unfortunately, ever charged with a DUI, what you can and can't do. So give you some good information that you can use, or hopefully never have to use, but things that you'll be aware of if you ever find yourself in that situation. So that's the first thing we're going to try to accomplish today. The second thing we're going to try to accomplish today is kind of give our viewers a go by on how intoxicated, how your blood alcohol level, which we'll talk about, can go up as you drink casually. And so today you can see we've got some beers here, and we've been drinking some of these beers before we got started today. So this ought to be a very entertaining podcast, if nothing else. And so we're going to be drinking. We've got some whiskey behind us, and so we're going to interject some whiskey with our beers here, and then we've got a little breathalyzer. So we're actually going to be taking some regular intervals to blow into our intoxicator to show you what our blood alcohol level is. And again, this is only going to be, an hour long or so podcast, and we're going to drink maybe a little more heavily than we would in an hour to kind of show you, again, how quickly these numbers can go up. So just kind of a general social experiment here. But anyway, let me introduce everybody real quick on our panel. First, my name is Josh Whitaker. I'm an attorney with the law firm of McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer. I am an attorney. I do not practice criminal traffic law, so I am more of a real estate business law attorney. I am your host today. I will not be able to offer you a lot of insights on DUI law. That will not be my role today. I will be a moderator. So down at the end of our panel, I'm going to introduce first attorney Damion McCullers. He is a partner with the law firm of McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer. And he is a attorney that does a lot of criminal and DUI traffic representation of the clients of our law firm. And he is going to be doing a lot of talking today because he's the guy who knows the nuts and bolts of the North Carolina statutes and case law and how to handle these type of infractions. Next to him is attorney Joe Hamer. Joe is a partner with the law firm of McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer as well. Like me, he does not practice much DUI traffic law. But he is here today, again, to help with our social experiment, and it's always handy to have more than one attorney around. So that's Joe. And on the left of me is attorney Eric Hudson, and he's an attorney with the law firm of McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer. And he does not practice much DUI or traffic law either. Again, he's here just for our social experiment and to lend, I'm sure, valuable commentary.
I think he's out of control.
He's out of control.
Eric is not drinking today. Eric is drinking water. He's going to be our first participant to blow on the breathalyzer.
And our driver.
So we're going to go ahead and get a control blow on our breathalyzer to make sure it's working. Eric should blow a 0-0.
2, 1. A lot of lung power to do the breathalyzer.
That was hard.
I'll show the camera.
I gave out at like 5 seconds and had to start again.
So that did register as 0-0. So we think our equipment is functional.
And I think even at this point, that's a good part to interject. You'll see people, or you'll hear people say a lot of times that if they're dealing with a law enforcement officer, they may refuse them. And that's kind of more of a when you get down to the station type of thing, or when you get to the Batmobile. But just as it was demonstrated there, it takes a lot of lung capacity to even register a blow sometimes. And if you're not used to doing that, it can become kind of a back and forth with the officer or with whoever you're dealing with in law enforcement, because they may say that you're being non-compliant when in all actuality, you just don't have the lung capacity to do it. And at that point, they will give you what we call a refusal. And that's something that we'll delve into as we kind of go further along. But I just wanted to talk about that because it was right on point with what just happened.
Sure.
And literally, it was difficult for me to blow. I did 5 seconds and I had to start over.
And you're in good health.
I know, and you're not
reasonably good
intoxicated.
health. I'm not intoxicated. I don't have asthma. I don't have COPD, so I could see how that would be difficult for some people.
Well, let's go ahead and set the stage here. So right now, let me go ahead and finish this because then me and Joe will be even. Hold on.
I guess I'll start.
On our official beer tally, Josh and I are at 1.5 beers in, so I think maybe get a blow just to see.
Yeah. Why don't you start out?
baseline.
Start us out.
Don't blow it.
Well, you don't have to blow super hard, do you?
We just want to get a sample.
It just beeped.
I think it's done.
Yeah.
Dear Jesus, there's no way that's correct. It's danger. Danger.
Wow.
So I'll see you guys later.
So that is a beer and a half for
beers.
you.
Nah, it's .067.
Oh, it went down. It was
Yeah,
still
this
beeping. It's
can't
probably
be,
not done.
I think you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, stop clicking it, man.
Well, what am I supposed to do? Why don't you blow and just get in? I blew it too hard. That's my problem.
0.0. You're not doing a good job holding this up.
I'm sorry.
0.064.
That's the same thing you had, right, Joe? Or close to it.
It's close to it, and we've had the same exact amount of beers. We're both relatively healthily sized individuals. So
Yeah, do we have to announce that? Do we need to announce our size? Just as
I
does
think
that matter?
I
would
think for
say-
scientific purposes, we are probably
I'm going to go with petite for
of
me.
above average size. If you look at the national averages, so that's
Definitely
that's to be
above
considered.
Above average. I consider myself above average.
I've got a large amount of mass.
Damion, you just started.
On
So
me?
we need a baseline for you?
Yeah, let's get a baseline.
All right.
for me. There we go.
So 0.05.
I think a lot of this has to do with how quickly we've drank. You know, I think there has to be some removal time from drinking to blowing.
I could see that.
Does that not make sense? Don't you think, for scientific
Probably.
purposes?
I think this is an important point to kind of make, that just from a defense attorney standpoint, the first thing that I want to look into in looking at the discovery, if a DUI does come about, is when was the last time this has been calibrated? Was it done within the standards that are required by the Department of Health and Human Services? Because there are guidelines that the state sets in place that has to be done and maintained for each individual. You'll hear the officers calling it an instrument. I call it a machine. It's got moving parts. It's a machine. They call it an instrument. But that's one of the things that you want to take into consideration. And is there some give or take as far as what the blow may be? So is there a plus or minus that may come along with it? I will also go into and just kind of say, as it relates to the PBT, specifically this type of PBT, or the one that the law enforcement officer may use on the side of the road, that blow does not come in as it relates to any kind of court proceeding. The blow that we would be talking about, whether it's a 0.08 or a 0.15 or whatever the case may be, would be the one that you do downtown at the station or in a Batmobile, which is kind of a more sensitive machine and kind of gets a better reading. The one that's here would be done generally on the side of the road. And basically what would be testified to as it relates to court is whether or not there was the presence of alcohol. So the officer wouldn't be able to give what the reading was as your portable breath test was done on the side of the road. You would just get whether or not there was a positive reading for alcohol. And that goes into him formulating his opinion on whether or not to arrest for DUI.
What?
I never thought about this before, but that makes sense, because if you recently drank, this is to get to your blood alcohol, but it's not measuring your blood alcohol, because the only way that can be done is with blood. So this has to have some, if you literally just drink alcohol, then if you're blowing, it's going to be stronger. Sure. I mean, some of it may still be in your mouth.
Right. Well, it's in your mouth, and that's what it's actually coming out from, is the air that's coming back up. So it's really measuring the percentage of alcohol in the air that you're blowing
right
out.
And from that they can,
which is going to be great,
then derive what your blood alcohol content is. Extrapolate, derive, whatever.
I think we blow again after we've had some.
We'll finish this beer.
As much as I want to drink this, we'll wait.
Nobody's stopping you.
You finish this beer?
Yeah, we'll finish this beer,
and then
we'll have a shot of something,
and then we'll wait a minute or two, and then blow again. I think we need to get removed from the drinking.
Because your body
beer.
is metabolizing the alcohol, so that's what's happening. So
I don't know about your metabolic rate.
You're blowing 0.06, but there's not 0.06 in your blood yet, because it ain't even had time to get there.
Right.
True.
All right. Well, let's backtrack. We got a lot of things to talk about.
Also, how are you feeling? Like, how are y'all feeling at this point?
I don't feel appreciably impaired yet.
Do you feel anything?
That is a
I
standard.
feel something.
Okay. Well, that's good. It's good to feel something.
Large man, not a frequent drinker, so this is a, but I feel something.
Now, I would note, I don't know when this podcast will air.
In the future.
but we're filming this at about 10:30 on a
Morning.
Tuesday morning. So this is, we're really forcing these things down.
And we're kind of degenerates, really.
This is it, all in the name of science.
All right, well, let's backtrack. What I want to do is I want to set the stage for Damion to get his advice on some situations that I think, real ordinary people may find themselves in. So the fact pattern that I'm going to establish for our discussion today is going to be someone who's gone out to eat dinner. They've had 2 or 3 beers with dinner, sat there for a while, do not feel intoxicated, probably are not intoxicated, and are heading home. And you're heading home, and the blue light's going behind you. You're going to be pulled over. There's going to be an officer who at least suspects you of driving under the influence. And that's kind of, we're going to set the stage for our fact pattern, what you can refuse, what you can't refuse. That's where we're going to get started. And we'll take this fact pattern as far as we can. We may change it here or there, but that's where we're starting. And so I'm going to throw it to Damion with the officer has gotten out of the vehicle. You've been safely pulled over. And I guess we should mention here, you don't have to pull over right away if the blue lights go on behind you. You can find a safe lighted space to pull over, but you've done that. The officer's coming to your vehicle. He's going to ask you for your driver's license and your registration. He's going to start talking to you. Here, Damion, what's your advice for somebody? Now, we've had a couple of beers. We're not intoxicated, but certainly, we all want to be law-abiding. Our law enforcement, they do good, hard work. We don't want to be rude to them. We don't want to be disrespectful. But under the law, there's things you can and can't do if you, or there's things you can and can't do if you feel like you're going to be a suspect for a crime, which a DUI, of course, would be a crime. And so here I'm going to swing it to Damion. This would probably be good for anything, but just generally, if an officer approaches your vehicle, what are some things you want to be aware of, some things you've be thinking about?
Okay. The first thing that I want to say is, one, just don't put yourself in the situation. There are a number of rideshare programs. There are a number of ways you can call a family member, a friend. Just don't drive, don't drink and drive.
Uber, taxi.
That's the easiest thing to do. However, inevitably, someone always does it. So you get to that point where you're coming from dinner, you've had a couple of beers or a glass of wine with dinner, and you get pulled over. What I will tell you is you want to pull over kind of in a timely manner, not even kind of, you want to pull over in a timely manner. You certainly want to pull over somewhere that's safe. But as all of this is happening, from the moment that officer gets behind you, even before he blue lights you, that investigation is happening. So the portion that we talk about as far as that goes is the car in motion, because one of the elements for driving under the influence or driving while impaired is driving. So he's looking at the vehicle in motion and he's determining who's driving, what, if any, are there any traffic violations that are happening, whether it be speeding, is there a tail light out, is the registration up to date, inspection, that type of thing. Once you get blue lighted and you're pulled over, most of the time at some point that officer would indicate to you that he has some type of reason for pulling the car over. So he can't just pull you over because you're driving a red car and he doesn't like red. That's not how that works. There's some form of an infraction or something that gave him a reason to want to go ahead and blue light you.
And we're assuming that.
We're assuming that just based off of the fact pattern. But and I will say again, like you said, our law enforcement, they do a great job. They have a hard job, and the great majority of the time, there is something that has grabbed their attention. Again, it doesn't have to be anything major, so you don't have to be doing 90 and a 45. It literally can be that your registration sticker is out. That is a legitimate reason for that officer to pull you over.
So make sure you keep all that stuff
up
to date.
So some of the easy things to do is wear your seatbelt.
Yes.
If you're driving at night, have your headlights on. Make sure that your registration is up to date. Make sure your inspection is up to date. If you have a child, make sure they're in a car seat.
Smart.
Those types of things can save you a world of trouble. Now back to kind of the fact pattern and where we are, where we've been pulled over, we've pulled over safely. The officer is now out of the car and approaching. The first thing that I would say is, one, you always want to be respectful if you can. You don't necessarily have to, just kind of fall all over yourself, but, yes, sir, and no, sir, or yes, ma'am, no, ma'am will go a long way, especially on the back end if you do end up getting charged with a DUI, DWI, just because one of the non-statutory factors as it relates to this is were you polite and cooperative with the officer? And you'll hear that a lot as it relates to non-statutory mitigating factors. So you want to make sure that, if at all possible, you're polite and cooperative.
And I'll interrupt you there. We have a lot of family law enforcement in our family, and I think that does go a long way. Just simple, it's a bad situation. You don't want to be pulled over. I'm sure the law enforcement folks don't want to have to be pulling you over. But the more pleasant and polite that I think you can be, I think most law enforcement officers are going to extend that same courtesy back to you.
Absolutely. I think the overwhelming majority would say that, again, that goes a long way. And, they're out doing their job. You have certain rights as a citizen. And everybody can be cordial and polite. And even in this particular situation, and you have, again, certain rights that you can exercise, but sometimes it's just about the way that you exercise them. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that portion of it. Now, as it relates to those rights, once you're approached, you do, if asked, have to produce a license and registration. Just that is a part of having a driver's license, in North Carolina. You have to be able to produce that on command for the law enforcement officer once you've been blue lighted. Now, the next portion of it is if you're being asked questions, and generally those questions are, hey, where are you coming from tonight? Or, hey, where you been? That type of thing. You are not under any obligation to answer those types of questions.
Because at that point, it may seem like just conversation, but the law enforcement officer is taking everything.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There's an investigation underway at that point. And some of the things that, while you think it's just an innocent conversation, he's looking to see, do you have red glassy eyes? Is there an odor of alcohol coming from your breath? Are you slurring your speech? Are you able to answer those types of questions? And they seem like innocent questions. Where are you coming from?
Does it make sense?
Does
based
it make
on where
sense
you are?
Where you are, that type of thing. So, you're not under any obligation and you're not required to answer those questions. Now, certainly if you feel like, you want to answer those questions, you can indeed answer those questions, but you're not under an obligation to answer those questions. And even if you want to decline, you can say, well, I appreciate your inquiry, officer, but I would prefer not to answer those questions, and just leave it at that. Once you've produced your license and registration, the officer at that point will kind of have to make a decision about what they want to do.
Damion, I got a question. Have you ever, in your experience, seen a situation where the person who was pulled over engaged the officer, talking, told them, answering questions, and it helped them? Because
generally,
what little bit of criminal law I practiced, it never helped.
Generally not. I have had clients that, have contacted me after the fact, and, it usually gets to a point where, if nothing else, the officer is going to ask the person to at least step out of the vehicle and get to a point where they do the portable breath test. If nothing comes about with the portable breath test, then I have seen situations where the person has been let go. But generally speaking, to answer your question,
you're not going to talk your way out of it.
You're not going to talk your way out of it. And that kind of goes for not just DUI or DWI, but just kind of in a criminal law setting in general.
I think it's hard for the average person. We're all from the South. We don't want to be impolite. So the officer's talking to you, and it's very hard
just ignore
to just ignore them, or just say, hey,
sure,
I really don't feel like answering. It's a really hard. And I understand the value in it, but it's really hard to do.
Well, and not only that, human nature is you want to defend yourself. If somebody's accusing you of something, or you feel like they're accusing you of something, even if they don't come right out and say, hey, I think you've been drinking and I think you're not sober, if you get the hint that, well, I feel like he's saying I'm drunk, or, I'm under the influence, human nature is to say, well, I didn't even have that many beers, or, I'm not drunk.
Don't say that.
That's just human nature. That's what you want to do, is defend yourself.
I'm not drunk. You don't even know me.
But literally the best thing that you can do is, even if you decide you want to answer the questions, is answer the questions, but don't necessarily volunteer extra information.
Yeah,
So if the officer
absolutely.
asks you where you're coming from, literally tell them where you're coming from. I'm coming from dinner.
But make sure you know where you're coming from and make
Let's give
sure
them
you
the
know
bare
where you were
minimum.
going.
Yeah,
The bare
I mean, it's
minimum.
not even the bare minimum. You're answering this question.
Sure.
I think people, there's an exercise that I do with my clients a lot of times, and I'll ask them, "Do you have the time?" And again, human nature is when I ask, "Do you have the time?" They're gonna say, "Oh yeah, it's 1:00." Well, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, "Do you have the time?" And your answer is yes. Now, if I ask you what time is it, then that's different. You give me the time, but we have a general disposition of oversharing.
Volunteering information.
And volunteering information. And in this particular setup and in this particular situation, that doesn't bode well for the citizen.
Well, let's give you time to take a drink because you've been talking a lot.
Sure.
So now in our fact situation, you've been pulled over, and again, you've had a couple of beers with dinner. You've given the officer the information that he wants, and you haven't volunteered any other new information. You realize that he's investigating you just by asking you questions, just by being right there beside you in the
By
vehicle,
pulling you over.
With blue lights, yeah.
Yeah.
And he, in theory, he's already got you on something. You either were speeding, registration was out. He's already noted something that may be a citable offense, and now he's just seeing if anything else is going on, doing his job. And so as attorneys, we're gonna want you to protect yourself as much as you can. And so now he's done his investigation. We're gonna assume, or he started to ask you questions. He's begun his investigation. We're gonna assume he is suspecting that you're intoxicated, or at least too intoxicated to be driving. And so the next stage here, Damion, I'm imagining. Well, I'll let you take it from there. But he suspects that you're intoxicated. He's asked you all the normal questions. Now, step 2 of this is he's probably going to be asking to pull you out of the vehicle.
So, yes, generally how that exchange happens is you're pulled over, the officer approaches the car, asks you the general questions, would you please produce your license and registration? And one thing about that, even while you're looking for your license and registration, that's one of the things that the officer is looking at, and he's looking to see is if you fumble while you're getting your license and registration. They're looking to see if you know what your license and registration look like. I've had situations where
Sure, that's a treat for you.
where clients have had their license in their wallet and they're flipping past their license each time, or their hand the officer their bank card because it has their picture on it. So again, this allegedly, this whole time the officer literally is investigating and kind of looking for clues as to whether or not you have your normal mental and or physical faculties about you. And you hear people say normal and or physical faculties because that's one of the standards that we'll look at later when you're talking about DUI or DWI situation. Once you've produced that information, sometimes the officer will go back to his car, run that just to make sure that your license is valid, to make sure you don't have any outstanding warrants, to just make sure everything is good with the administrative piece of it. Once that happens, that's when he will normally come back to the vehicle. And if he suspects that you are under the influence or that you're intoxicated, that's normally the point where he says, would you mind stepping out of the car for me? Or he'll say, step out of the car for me. I also tell clients most of the time, the difference between whether you have a right to refuse something or whether you need to do it is if the officer is asking you a question, then you generally have a right to refuse or to not do that. If the officer gives you a command, you have to do it.
And I think this is a very important distinction because most people don't find themselves in this situation with the law enforcement very often. So
Right.
you're more than likely already going to be nervous. This is going to be
stressful situation.
It's going to be an unnerving situation for you. You're going to be on the defense because you know the officer is investigating you. So this is a very important distinction to make. And I don't think any law enforcement officer is going to fault you for asking. So if you can't distinguish whether this is a question or a command.
Right. And I mean, generally, just for our purposes, the command is going to be step out of the vehicle.
Sure.
That's the command. That means get out. And by all means, once you get a command from a law enforcement officer, you follow it.
You follow it.
Period.
Sure.
No question. Just do it.
Nothing good can come from
Nothing good can come from not doing
It comes
it.
back to being polite, compliant.
So that's kind of where that is. And generally that will be a command. Please step out of the vehicle, ma'am, or please step out of the vehicle, sir. Now, once you get to that point and you've stepped out of the vehicle, and one thing, again, that I want to talk about as it relates even to stepping out of the vehicle, one of the things that the officer is looking for when you're stepping out of the vehicle is, are you steady on your feet? Are you leaning on the armrest to help you get out of the vehicle? Are you assisting yourself, or can you do it under your own power? Generally, once you step out of the vehicle, the officer is going to ask you to walk to the rear of your vehicle and to the front of his, because that's generally where cameras are and all of that good stuff. One of the things that they're going to be looking for is, are you walking with your hand on the vehicle to assist yourself while you're walking down to the rear of your vehicle to the front of his? So all of these things, again, this whole interaction, this whole time, literally it's an investigation, and the officer is looking at everything. So things that we would take as absolutely nothing and unimportant, they're very important, and they come into play because they're all going to be written in this report.
Well, it's subjective to the officer too.
Right.
So,
Very true.
if it's an uneven pavement outside of the car, it's possible you could stumble and have no alcohol, but that's subjectively to the officer, that looks
Right,
like.
but that may be a clue that, to him that you are under the influence or that you're impaired.
And the average person, I would imagine, has not been to many DUI trials.
Sure.
And obviously you've seen quite a bit. And these are facts that become important at trial. So again, we're thinking these are just pleasantries, getting out of the vehicle, but these are things that are going to be recanted to a judge or a jury. These are things that are going to come up at your trial. So you've got to be thinking about them all the time.
Right, and we're dissecting this, and we're kind of taking it step by step, but this all literally happens within the span of, from the time you get pulled over to the time you're at the rear of the vehicle. This may take 5-6 minutes.
But what happens at trial is it does get dissected.
But that's exactly what happens at
piece of
trial,
it.
is it gets dissected literally second by second.
All right. So in our fact pattern, our officer has pulled us over, begun his investigation. He's got us out of the vehicle. We're at the back of the vehicle. Now we're going to take a break and kind of do our tally. So right now, Eric is on
I am at 0. I haven't even drunk. I've drunk this much.
Are we sure there's no alcohol in that water?
So
Eric's
Eric's on his first water. Me and Joe are
I don't
on
want to
our
get bloated.
We're 2.5 in. That's our
Third beer.
Third beer.
Strong
This
beers.
is
Damion's
one for
on.
me. This is one for me.
Damien's finished his first beer, and he's working on that. So we're going to take a minute to kind of continue our social experiment and blow on our breathalyzer. I'm going to start it down here with Damion.
Just out of curiosity, y'all have drunk 2 different types of beers. Do you know if one was stronger than the
One
other?
was a little stronger, I think.
All right, that was good.
Solid.
That was good, steady.
Good Lord,
I told
man.
you 1 second lasts
You
for
should
3.
run
isn't it?
marathons. You missed your calling.
What do we got? All right, you got to show it.
I got to show it.
I'm
0.06.
at a 0.06.
Again, I think this goes back to
But you just took a
Yeah,
drink.
drinking
I
so
just
quickly
took-
and taking
yeah.
a sip prior to drinking. Now, Josh and I have both abstained for a 5 to 6 minute period. Would you say?
I just took a sip.
I'd say
All right, you wanna
5:45
grab that
maybe.
off?
Yeah,
5:45 to
We'll go
6.
in. All right, so here we go. Here we go.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's good.
See, I wasn't prepared.
I'm so healthy. Nah, so I'm dead.
Wow.
0.058. So again, I
In
don't.
France, all this would be legal.
I feel like we have not. I feel like we have not really had that much to drink.
No,
Which is
no.
the point- which
but
is the
again,
point.
if you're leaving the bar, I mean, this is about the time, If 5 to 6 minutes removed from drinking, you could be, hemmed up.
Keep going. Refusal. That's a refusal.
That's a refusal.
That's a refusal.
You're going to jail.
That's 1 year.
0.06.
Refusal. That's 1 year right there. License, right, Damion?
I want you guys to come visit Josh Whitaker in prison.
All right.
That's your top.
We're gonna make him do it again.
It's a
I've been drinking water. Of course it's gonna be
man.
0.
Yeah,
Do it again
it's
just
a
to make
zero.
sure it's working.
Yeah, just make sure it's working. We're back.
0.
0.
Yes.
There we go.
Science.
All right. So we'll put that.
Bill.
All right. So
Back at the car.
So the officer's gone through, license registration, has asked you out of the vehicle. Usually once you get to this stage, the officer is probably going to determine that he would like for you to perform some standardized field sobriety tests. They consist of some that people have seen before. Sometimes people haven't seen them, but one leg stand, horizontal gaze nystagmus test, walk and turn. Sometimes the officer will have you do some non-standardized field sobriety test, saying your ABC, starting from a particular point and ending at a particular point. These particular tests, you are not obligated to do.
And let's stop there and because I know this is the question people ask me, even though I don't practice this area of law. This is the question I get the most. So these roadside tests, whatever you want to call them, they have a lot of names. A lot of stand-up comedians make fun of them. You don't have to do these.
You do not have to do them. I say that they're gymnastics tests because even a trained gymnast sometimes.
Once again, they're so subjective.
Right, and I mean they're set up, I believe, in my opinion, for you not to be able to do them, or for there to be certain clues that are present, whether you do them perfect or whether you don't.
Sure.
But
Part of that
the
is
nystagmus test. It's supposed to be the most objective, correct?
Well,
I know
there's a lot of science behind that. I will tell you that in the courtroom, the officer, there's case law that says the officer has to be qualified as an expert in the horizontal gaze nystagmus test in order to testify to its results. So
I don't know if you told us what that is.
I
don't know if you explained what the nystagmus is.
So
I jumped to
basically,
it.
and it's fine, but it's one of the standardized field sobriety tests. And basically, nystagmus itself is the involuntary jerking of the eye that happens when you look to your peripheral. What the officer is going to look for is smooth pursuit. And basically, they put a stimulus in front of your eye. Sometimes it's a pen, sometimes it's their finger. There are guidelines that they're supposed to use in order to know how far away to hold the pen or their finger or whatever. And they're supposed to look for smooth pursuit, equal tracking, a number of different things. But ultimately, what they're looking for is how far your eyeball goes before the nystagmus sets in, which is the involuntary jerking of the eye. But again, there's specific training that they have to have, and they have to be qualified as an expert to testify as to the results of that test. Some officers have done that training and have testified as experts lots of times. Sometimes they have not. This gets into where an attorney becomes vital in your trial, because if you are a pro se or you're representing yourself and you don't know this information, that information may come in if a judge allows it without your objection. If you don't lodge an objection to it, then it just may come in. So that's important. There's a lot that goes on with that. But again, that's at the trial level. Right now, we're at the car and the officer's asking you to do these tests.
So Damion, so in our fact pattern now, the officer's taking you to the back of the car. He obviously feels that you're at least somewhat intoxicated because he's taking you down this road. And so he's asked you to do these side of the road tests, and you know you don't have to do it and it can't help you in any way. You have politely declined to take those tests.
Right. And again, I kind of want to just reiterate, you can politely decline. You don't have to say, be belligerent and say all kinds of crazy stuff.
Help you.
You can just say, respectfully, officer, I would decline to take those tests, and leave it at that. Now, it becomes kind of, I would say that it's on the citizen at that point to kind of stick to their guns if that's the decision that they have made to not perform those tests. Obviously, the officer may tell you, well, I think it's important that, you perform these tests. I would like for you to perform these tests. This may help you to show me that you're not intoxicated, those types of things. But again, if you've made the decision that you do not want to perform those tests, again, you just need to say, well, I appreciate the offer, but again, I'm politely declining. I have not seen a situation where someone performed those tests and it helped them in any way. Most of the time, I have seen, even when the person, in my opinion, performs the test almost perfect, there's still some form of a clue that's
they're going to pick it apart.
So right now, and as attorneys, we're thinking about, this is an active investigation. What evidence would the officer have against you to testify to in a court of law? And right now, we haven't given him that much because he has your license and your registration. You've declined to answer politely any questions that he may have asked about what you've been doing. And you've gotten out of the vehicle and you've walked on your own to the back of the vehicle.
Right.
You're not walking
under your own power. You walked under your own power
at this point. Yeah.
So you haven't leaned against the vehicle and walked hand over hand down the vehicle.
So right now, the officer, the only things that he might have against you would be an odor of alcohol and
whatever the driving is.
Yeah, whatever the original intent of the pool was. So
which may or may not have anything to do with
Absolutely. It may have absolutely nothing to do with,
so DUI or anything.
So in our fact pattern, in our fact pattern, our guy is not intoxicated, and we're to the point where we've declined the roadside test, and so now this is where I assume the breathalyzer is gonna come into play if the officer has decided, that he needs to do it or she needs to do it.
If the officer has decided that he or she needs to further investigate, they may again ask you to perform the roadside PBT, which is what we've been doing here. It's not this exact model, but same concept.
It's at least the same
concept. Again, you are not obligated to do that. You can refuse it. It's kind of up to the person at that point. If for some reason the person does give the sample, again, like what we talked about, this brings us back to where we were at the very beginning of the podcast. The officer is only going to be able to testify in court as to there was a positive reading, not what the reading is. So this is kind of one of those situations where
positive being anything over 0.0.
Anything over 0. Sure. There's alcohol present.
So that's when they go and get an actual reading. If
so that may be the point where the officer, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there's going to be a reading, and the officer's going to see what that reading is.
And that's going to be part of his opinion.
That's going to be part of his
opinion. Not the number, but he knows what the number is.
He knows what that number is, so he may say, well, I think I want to go get, a more specialized reading, basically. And that's when you get to the point where, and again, where we're talking about here, this is all happening on the side of the road at whatever, 10:30 at night. Yeah. And, that officer is literally forming his opinion on whether or not he or she believes that you're intoxicated. Now, once they form that opinion, that's when they're going to say, I believe you're under the influence of alcohol. I want to take you downtown. You're under arrest, whatever the case may be. And at that point, when you get downtown, is when you'll blow into what we call the intoxicator, or whatever that machine is that they use.
And I think we should draw a line too for the folks who have hung in with us this long. Is once the officer decides, in his opinion, if he wants to take you downtown, or if he or she wants to take you downtown, I think it's safe to assume they've decided they think you're intoxicated.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. And one of the distinctions that I want to make is that officer doesn't have to have a reading of 0.08 or whatever. They can say that, in their opinion, as a law enforcement officer, that you're not in control of your mental and or physical faculties, whether it's a 0.05, 0.08, or it's a 0.16, whether it's nothing.
Yeah. Well, sure. I think this is a time where we can point out too. So you could blow a 0 on this. You could still be intoxicated from something else.
Absolutely.
Right. So we're focusing on alcohol because of our social experiment. That's because I think most people who get pulled over are suspected to be under the influence of alcohol.
And it's the only thing that's really measurable
drugs on the podcast.
Right. And we can't use illicit drugs as part of our social experiment here.
And we don't. A strong word.
Don't.
Yeah. But
it wasn't in the planning.
But you could blow a 0. You could decide you want to do this. You could blow a 0, and that officer could still decide he thinks something else is causing the intoxication.
Absolutely. And some officers have gone to certain schools and have extra training, or they call in for an officer that has had that extra training. We call them DREs. They're drug recognition experts. So they are trained to look for certain things that if a person's on opioids or, under the influence of some other impairing substance, they would be able to recognize what those signs are and be able to give an opinion as to what they think that is.
And I think it's important to note, you said opioids, they can be legally prescribed to you. You're taking the correct amount. You're not taking more than you're supposed to, but they can impair you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Driving.
So, and again, it's your mental and or physical faculties. So if that prescription is impairing your mental and or physical faculties, then you should not be driving. You can still be charged. You haven't had 1 ounce of alcohol.
There's a reason that they have on the bottle, don't operate
that little
heavy
label
machinery,
that says don't operate a vehicle or, that type of thing. Absolutely.
Well, let's go back to our fact pattern. So now we're at the back of the vehicle. We refused roadside tests. Let's say our citizen in our fact pattern has refused the breathalyzer.
The officer at that point is going to make a determination on whether or not they feel like that person is under the influence, or if they have their mental and or physical faculties about them. In my experience, the officer is probably going to take that person into custody. It's not a guarantee, but I mean, that's been my experience. And at that point, the person will probably be placed under arrest for the suspicion of DUI, DWI, and taken to whatever agency that officer is with, or to the local jail.
So our social experiment is ongoing. We've got some shots lined up.
You do a beer tally?
Yeah, so let's see. Me and Joe are at 3.5 beers. Damion's at
Like 1.5.
1.5.
You missed a half.
This is over like a 40-minute period, would you say?
Put a half on him. No, it's been like an hour and a half.
God, that's a fancy watch.
It's been about an hour and a half. Eric is still drinking his water. So we're going to start down with Damion, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the breathalyzer of everybody just again to show us how quickly your blood alcohol content can rise. All right, that
we
sounds
go.
better.
See what we get.
I feel like it's going to be similar.
It is.
Nah. That's
So
0.048.
048.
Wow.
So again, 1.5 beers,
That sounds
6 minutes removed, registers a 0.048. I think that's legit.
That sounds about like what
You want to snatch that mouthpiece?
y'all's was a little more than that, but it was right after. It's hot.
I was built for this.
Wow. Wow.
0.061.
We getting a good shot of that.
We're getting close.
Honestly, I feel like that's fairly accurate for how I feel right now. Yeah, you don't want to grab that, trust me.
You're just boring him. 3, 2.
You
You gotta go till it beeps, man.
Come on, man.
This ain't your first rodeo.
Wow.
That's about the same, right?
0.062.
Now we'll go to Damion. Damion, what is the legal limit?
We're rapidly approaching it.
0.08.
Yeah, so we are.
And so as you've seen, we have not.
It was literally saying danger on it. I don't know what that means.
We
but
haven't
you're
had
in danger.
We
for
haven't had
some
a
reason.
whole lot to drink, or at least I don't feel like we've had a whole lot to drink, and that's what we're blowing. And of course, that's what an officer will be looking at. That's what a court
warm up.
will be looking at. I forgot you're gonna.
We got
Please
our
continue.
control. No, let's do our control.
Doing the control.
Subtle lip quiver.
You made it.
Ah, you almost made it.
Let's get it over here. Yeah. So our control still works.
So this is an accurate breathalyzer.
All right, so we've got a shot of a cheaper whiskey here that we're going to take. Because you know you don't shoot whiskey. You sip nice whiskey. You shoot bad whiskey.
We're not going to tell
That's
you what it is because you just called it
Very
cheap.
relevant to the podcast.
All right.
We gotta do a fancy-
Cheers. Cheers.
Good
Cheers.
fiscal year.
This is not a shot glass.
All right.
Yeah. Big red.
I think this is probably a good time for a disclaimer, too. So
Yes.
obviously, we're all attorneys.
Sure.
We're all attorneys for the law firm of McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer. This is not meant to be legal advice. So legal advice can only be rendered, if you meet one-on-one with an attorney, they know the facts of your situation. This would be a very unprofessional time to render any legal advice whatsoever, as we have been performing our social experiment. Here, we want to give you just some basic information, just some basic tools that you can use if you're out there on the road and this happens to you. It's not meant to help you avoid a DUI. It's not meant to defame our law enforcement agencies in any way. These are just things I think you need to know as an average citizen.
It's protecting your rights.
Yeah.
I mean, you have these rights. They're there for a reason. You don't have the right not to incriminate yourself, things of that nature. And so that's why we're discussing this the way we are. If you do find yourself where you've been charged with a DUI, you've been charged with a criminal offense, I hope you give us a call. Damion, Cameron, or any of our attorneys who practice criminal law will be happy to sit down with you, consult with you, figure out what's going on, and represent you. We obviously don't usually drink at 11:33 in the a.m. on a weekday.
We're doing this for you guys.
Only on Tuesday.
This is an experiment, but we're happy to help you. And again, part of this is fun. Part of this is to get some real information out to you that you might find helpful. Because a lot of this stuff I didn't know before I was before I was partnered with a criminal attorney who had been through a number of DUI trials. But this is the things that a judge, a jury, they're going to look for if you're ever accused of DUI. And the consequences for a DUI conviction are real, and they're tough to deal with. It's not a laughing matter in any way. We've got a shot of whiskey in us now, so this will continue to get more and more
Fun. Entertaining.
fun and entertaining.
It's going off the rails.
Depending on your definition of entertainment.
So take that as it may, but again, we're doing this just as an example to the folks who may be watching about how quickly your blood alcohol content can get up there. And of course, we're not eating anything.
God, that'd have been a great idea.
But this is where we find ourselves. So anyway, in our fact pattern, we've been removed from it for a long time. But in our fact pattern, we've come out of the car. We're at the back of the vehicle. We've declined any roadside test. We've been polite to the officers. We haven't been discourteous. We haven't been belligerent. But we've exercised our rights. And so now the officer's at a point where he's got to make a decision. If he thinks we're intoxicated, the next step, I feel like we're hiccuping way more than we normally would.
I've yet to hiccup. That's you.
I can't imagine why that would be.
The officer is going to have to make a decision on the evidence that you've given him, whether you're intoxicated or not, or whether he thinks you're intoxicated or not. And so we've exhausted kind of at this point all the roadside options. And so now, Damion, what's the officer's thought process? What's going to happen next?
For our fact pattern, the officer is going to make a determination of whether you're under the influence of some appreciable substance, namely alcohol, and if your mental and or physical faculties are impaired. If they believe that you are, they would then at that point, and I'll use myself just to kind of keep it off of anybody else, bad mojo, but they'll say, Mr. McCullers, I'm going to place you under arrest for suspicion of DWI or DUI. At that point, you'll be taken downtown to your local law enforcement agency or the local jail. And at that point, you may be asked to answer some more questions for the officer. Again, you have the right at that point, specifically at this point, if you're under arrest, to refuse to answer any of those questions. Again, you don't want to be belligerent or insulting or anything of the sort. You can just politely decline. And the officer will just say you refuse to answer any questions. The biggest point that we want to kind of talk about once you get to the point that you're downtown at a station or in a Batmobile or that type of thing is the officer is going to ask you to perform another test, which is, we call it the blow, or you're going to blow into the machine. They call it an instrument, but nonetheless, they're going to ask you to perform another blow. This is the one that could have dire consequences for you and your license as it relates to a refusal, or if you give a sample. If you refuse, in North Carolina, there's going to be at minimum a 1-year suspension.
And this is very important.
Absolutely.
So, we talk about what you can refuse to do and what you can't refuse to do. If an officer decides to take you downtown and you're going to have to blow into the machine downtown, you're no longer in a point where you can refuse anything. You're in custody.
Well,
you can refuse it, but there are consequences.
You can refuse,
Right.
but there are consequences.
Okay, so that's a good. All right.
So this is not, the officer asking you to perform standardized field sobriety tests where you either perform them or
We're not on the road anymore.
Right.
We're downtown. You're at the jail.
Yeah.
You have been arrested.
Yes.
And again, the officer is going to ask you to blow into this machine, or they'll call it an instrument. But you do have the right to refuse to do that. But what you have to take into consideration is that if you do refuse, you will be suspended for at least a year.
At minimum.
At minimum.
Your driver's license.
And this is what can you do about that? Because we have that call where people have refused and they've been suspended, and they're calling us to see what they can do about it.
So it kind of depends after the fact. Once the refusal is in place, there are some administrative ways that you may be able to save your license for a point in time, but that deals with having a hearing at DMV, which again, I strongly suggest that you contact an attorney in order to deal with that. It's time sensitive. There is a very short time frame that you have to give notice for that hearing. It's a very complicated situation. I always tell people you wouldn't call a plumber to work on your car. You wouldn't call a mechanic to work on your plumbing. So you definitely want to involve an attorney in that situation.
I'm gonna stop us. I'm gonna make this distinction again. Breathalyzer on the side of the road, you have a complete unfettered right. You can refuse that. There's
Absolutely.
no consequences for that.
Generally, there's not. For our purposes, you will say no.
Yeah.
There's certain situations where there may be, but for our purposes and for this fact pattern, no, there's no significant consequence for for refusing to do the roadside test.
The officer's taking you downtown. You're in custody. You've been arrested. You're in custody. You've gone downtown. There's going to be a different, we're not going to call it the breathalyzer. This is the blow into the machine.
Right.
That has severe consequences. So again, you can still refuse to blow into that machine, but you're going to face what we call civil suspension of your license.
Right. Well, and there's more distinctions that I need to make as well, because once you are charged, there's going to be a civil revocation that we call for 30 days regardless.
Period.
Just with charge.
Just for the mere fact that you've been charged with a DWI. Doesn't matter if you get found not guilty of it. Doesn't matter what happens. In the state of North Carolina, if you get charged with DWI or an implied consent offense, that civil revocation is going to start right then, 30 days, no questions asked. You can get limited driving privileges for those 30 days. But again, this is where I would employ you to talk with an attorney, understand what those rights are and how you go about getting them. But for our purposes and our fact pattern, just know that, one, if you get charged with the DWI, that 30-day civil revocation is going to happen. And on top of that, if you do refuse to blow when you're downtown or at the Batmobile, there's going to be a automatic 1-year suspension regardless.
When you're talking about refusal, there's different ways that you can be determined to have refused.
Right. So this goes back to when you were having trouble initially blowing into the machine. So what happens is a lot of times, some people, for whatever reason, they may have asthma, they may have a medical condition that just doesn't allow them to give a valid sample. Again, our law enforcement does a great job, and a lot of times they will give people an opportunity to try 3 and 4 times. But at some point, if you cannot give a valid sample, that officer is going to refuse you. And if he refuses you, whether you say, well, no, I attempted and I just couldn't get it. If he refuses you, it counts as a refusal, whether you attempted to do it or not. If they can't get a sample from you, it's a refusal. And it's all the same. If it's a refusal, it's a refusal, and that suspension starts regardless of whether you attempted to do it or not.
And so that's an important distinction. So you can be trying your best. You can have a medical condition. You can, well, for lack of better terminology, you can kind of fake that you aren't able to do it. But no matter what, that's going to be a refusal.
It's a refusal.
And a refusal on this part, that's a big deal. And that's what
Absolutely.
you need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
You're going to have consequences, and we see it every day. And we have people calling us, they can't get to work, they can't get their kids to daycare. But it's something you need to know before. That's what people tell me. Something you need to know before you need to know it. Now, I will point this out as well. No one wants to hire an attorney when they don't have to, and that's why services like LegalZoom have become popular. If you don't actually have to spend the money to hire an attorney, you certainly don't want to have to hire an attorney. I don't want to hire a plumber if I don't have to. I don't want to have to hire an electrician if I don't have to. But if you've gotten this far, if you're getting charged with a DUI, you need an attorney. You need legal representation. It doesn't have to be McCullers, Whitaker, and Hamer. I hope it is.
But we'd like it to be.
It's a great choice.
But you need legal representation because there's a lot of bad things that can happen. Insurance points, license revocation, jail time. There's a lot that can happen as a result of being charged with a DUI, and you need representation. It's not something, even if I wasn't an attorney, it's not something that I would, go about alone. You need an attorney. And, we've been talking about kind of the pre-situation, what happens before you're actually charged. But now we're getting to kind of the consequences that, if you are going to be charged with a DUI, you need representation. If the fact situation is correct, you may need a trial.
And you need representation as quickly as you can too, because
you don't want to wait on it.
Like Damion said, there are time frames involved with some of the limited privileges.
You need to get on it because this is a serious offense in North Carolina. It's something.
Ultimately, it's life altering. People.
Well, you think about not being able to get where you need to go. You think about not being able to drive.
Just that
you
alone
can't drive. What would we talk about as far as insurance?
It just depends on the individual insurance company.
It's not good.
But there's going to be an increase.
Yeah.
And it's just, and again, that's just if there's a conviction. But
tell us a little bit about the results of your blow and what's going to happen.
So if it's again, let's just say for our fact pattern, you blow a 10 or a 0.10.
Okay, good. We haven't gotten there yet. We're rapidly approaching.
You blow a 10.
Slightly
at
over
that
halfway.
point, the officer's going to place you literally under arrest, and you're going to go in front of a magistrate. They're going to talk
Damion,
about all that
sorry
stuff.
to interrupt you.
Yes,
Sorry to interrupt you.
So polite.
We did not talk about a witness.
you did not, and that's
That's
one
it.
of
So
the points that we
let's
want to get to.
backtrack. Let's backtrack.
Once we backtrack, so at the point where
This is complicated. That's why you need an attorney.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you get to the point where you actually blow into the machine, the officer's going to give you what we call your rights, and he's going to have you sign some forms. Part of those rights is you have the right to have a witness come and literally witness the blow itself. They generally give you a 30-minute window for that witness to get there. So you need to call someone that's fairly close to where you are. That person is going to need to make themselves known when they get to where you are and make sure that they make it known that they are there to see you perform that test. So it's not good enough for them to just say, hey, I'm here to be a witness. They want to, and this is very specific because there's case law that will come into play if for some reason your witness is not allowed to come see the blow and they are there on time. So you want to make sure that you call a witness.
David,
That
I'm
witness.
going to interrupt you again. This witness needs to be sober.
That would be.
You don't need to buy. You don't need to call.
In an ideal world,
Yeah.
You don't need to call somebody who was at the club with you.
No.
because then they're going to get charged
Yeah,
too.
been
that's
twerking all
a
night
great
too,
point.
man.
But even
What are
if
you
you
gonna
do that, we're going to assume that person Ubered to where you are.
Yeah.
And
Call
that-
somebody
and
responsible.
That they're
Don't call me
sobered
right
up
now.
by the time they get to you.
Don't worry, I wouldn't go
But
into
in a perfect world, yes, you want to call someone that
wanna
is
call
sober
Eric, 'cause
and
you're drinking
responsible.
sparkling
Because like I was
mineral
saying,
Yeah.
just, you know.
So if we had anything happen right now, we would call Eric because we know he drink water.
He ain't even had a
So-
full glass of water yet. So
I would call Eric
probably
and
drink that.
I would have Eric get to me as soon as he could.
Sorry to
because my
interrupt.
30 minutes, once the 30 minutes is up, your witness is not allowed back.
And that's not a lot of time.
It's
I mean,
not.
30
Because
minutes
you
is
have
not-
to get once you get there, you have to get back
You
to
have
where
to get back to where they are. But that's
Yeah.
why I was saying sober and responsible, because that person has to be articulate enough
Yeah,
to at least
sure.
say,
You gotta-
hey, I'm here to see Damion McCullers. I'm his witness. I want to witness
And they need to
the
get
blow.
there, too.
You got to get downtown.
And
You
I
got to
think-
know where it is. You got to park.
It's like
you gotta
phoning a
walk
friend
in.
who wants to be a millionaire.
I think we need to be clear too on. I think we keep talking about case law. Let's explain what case law is.
So case law is where basically there has come a legal issue that talks about what the law in North Carolina will be. Some of those are Trexler. That's a big one. But
So we have statutes in North Carolina that can control, like if you get charged with a DUI, you get charged under a specific statute. And then we have cases that have gone to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court where people
Right.
have kind of fleshed out, judges have given opinions and they fleshed out the statute and what the statute means and how it works day to day.
Right. And ultimately what it boils down to is a judge has fleshed out what can or cannot happen as it relates to that statute. So it's an interpretation of what should happen administratively as it relates to that charge or that statute.
The statute is a rule. Case law is an interpretation of that rule.
Just so everybody knows what we
Right.
mean when we refer to case law. Okay.
I wasn't explaining it to you. I knew you knew.
So we're downtown.
He's a smart guy.
We have blown, let's say everything has gone wrong. We've blown over a .08. We know that's our legal limit. We've
Right.
blown a .08. Well, should we talk about blowing below it?
Well, even at that point, like
Let's point out-
It's irrelevant,
we
right?
touched on it.
Yeah.
This is the one that's admissible. This is the
Right,
number
this
that's
is the one.
admissible
This
in
is
court.
the one that will be admissible, assuming that the machine has been calibrated
Right.
and everything is okay.
Potentially
with that.
admissible.
Potentially,
Right.
More likely than not, it's admissible.
Right.
But yeah. So if you've blown over the legal limit, you're under arrest. You're going in front of a magistrate. They're going to determine what your bond is and what your conditions of release are.
So we're gonna draw a line right here.
That's a good place to.
This is a good place to stop. So this is what we call everything pre-trial. So this is everything up to when you're going to be charged. After this, you're going to be processed. There's going to be a bond set. They may make you spend the night. Someone's going to have to come pick you up. But you've been charged with a DUI at this point. At this point, you need to call an attorney, somebody. Hopefully, it's us. It can be anybody. But you need representation. And that's gonna be all that we're gonna discuss today as part of our podcast. Now we're gonna do one more blow as part of our social experiment before we wrap up. We'll start at the end of the table.
All
This
right.
is after the shots.
You got beer left, man.
So I don't have as much as
No, that's-
Damion.
Well,
does.
he's
talking.
I've been talking.
He's done a great job. I've
He's
learned
not
a lot
losing his
about
train
him.
of thought.
Oh, it is that actually.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, you're up next.
I'm up
So
next.
mwhlaw.lawyer. www.mwhlaw.lawyer.
Make sure you get that
http://.
That's our website.
Make sure you get the correct / direction.
Our phone number, 919-772-7000.
It's a great phone number.
Damion McCullers is who you want to talk to. You don't want to talk. You don't want to talk to Josh
Don't
Whitaker.
ask for me.
You don't want to talk to Eric Hudson. You don't want to talk to Joe Hamer.
No,
you want to
no,
talk
no.
to Damion.
It's not that we're not
McCullers.
nice
guys.
and fun guys to talk to. Damion just is.
Damien's got a smooth and pleasing voice.
Damion does a fine job. You,
All right,
you
one
can't
blow.
do better than Damion.
Here we go. I'm going what? 7?
9.
What'd you blow? 0.4?
9.
4, 7.
Oh, .068. I would not drive right
7.
now. I'm gonna be honest with you.
7.
If I had the choice, I'd call a Yuba.
You do have a choice.
That's right. Eric, you're driving me.
Done. But everybody just keep in mind, there's an easy way to keep yourself out of this situation, and it's by
I'm excited to see what
Drinking
you
water.
Not drinking and driving.
Probably blow the exact same thing you blow.
You seem.
if you drink and you drink any
Well, your
amount.
body
that's right.
metabolizes different, so
That's
your number
true.
may be different.
I'm a large man. I eat a lot of
I'm about 6'1".
red meats.
I'm about 6'1", 240.
You enjoy all the meats of our
Yeah.
cultural stew.
I'm terribly unhealthy. I got 10
This
bucks.
is as close as
I
I
got
can
10
get.
bucks. He gets 6 seconds of blowing, and he's done.
He
That was
got
like
6
4
seconds
seconds.
dead on. He was at 4.
Oh, you're going
And
to jail,
stopped
brother.
again at 1.
You're lucky I'm not your
That's a
officer.
refusal.
Less than you.
Yeah, that's because you didn't finish your beer because you're a quitter.
All right, in our control.
I got 10 bucks. He blows a nothing.
0.
0.0.
That's going to bring to an end our podcast for today. We've kind of focused on what you need to know as someone who may be a suspect of driving under the influence. And we've talked about alcohol mostly because that's the most common thing that we see, but obviously marijuana, any kind of pain pills, things like
Anything
that.
that can impair.
Any narcotic.
Any impairing substance.
So this is kind of what you need to know to get you through a roadside stop. And we're going to stop here. Our social experiment is over. It's about noon, so we can go get some lunch
It's terribly early.
and sober up a
Thankfully.
little bit.
Yeah.
But again, call us if we can be of any help to you at all. You know, we've had a lot of fun today. This is a very serious topic, very serious consequences, and it's not something I would go on your own with. You know, hire an attorney, somebody to help you, somebody to advocate for you. Hopefully, we've been helpful to you. You'll have our email addresses kind of underneath everything. You'll have some links to the webpage. Call us if we can help you. Now, part 2 of this podcast will be coming out at a later time, and we'll talk about DUI trials and things you'll face when you get to the courtroom. And that's coming. You know, if you've been charged with a DUI, you're going to the courtroom. You're going to have a judge. You're going to have a jury. You're going to have a couple of court appearances. It's going to be something.
If you're in district court, you'll have just the judge. If you decide to go to Superior Court, or for some reason you end up in Superior Court, then you'll have a judge and a jury.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Damion. Even if you decide to plea, this is the most complicated.
It's
In district court, certainly.
It's still complicated. It's still worth having someone to guide you through the minefield.
Because there are
of
ways
what to
that you can
do.
improve your
Because
standing.
there are ways that you can improve your standing. There are certain phrases, one of them being an example, if you're pro se and you don't know, to say that you were polite and cooperative with the officer.
Which is the first thing that comes up
So
a
there's
lot of
one of the
times.
things that
There's
comes up.
aggravating factors.
There's aggravating factors. There's mitigating factors. There's levels that you want to know what they are. You want to be sentenced at, for example, you want to be sentenced at a level 5 if you have to be sentenced. It's counterintuitive because you would think level 1 is the lowest, but it's not. So you want to be sentenced at a level 5 as opposed to a level 1. So there's a lot that an attorney can help you with, and you would benefit from the advice of an attorney,
It's a
even if you
minefield,
determine that
truly.
you're
We
gonna-
don't want to hire people if we don't have to hire people. But if you're charged with a DUI, you need representation. It's going to save you money. It's going to save you insurance money. It's going to save you. It's going to be worth your time. Sure.
And it may just save you just the headache of having to deal with, the
Stress.
administrative process. So it's kind of good to have a guide, so to speak.
We appreciate you joining us today. We hope to hear from you if you need us. If not, we'll see you on the next Judica County podcast.
Stay safe, guys.